So I've been wanting to make a post now for a couple of weeks about the events going on in the world, and spurred largely by my faith as a Christian, um, and also by my puzzlement and amazement at my white Christian brothers and sisters' response to recent events. And by the response, I mean their Facebook post in which they convey their reactions to all of the things that have gone on since the death of George Floyd and the protests that have erupted in various cities. I think one of the things that has really disturbed me about this response is the way Christians, and again I'm talking about white Christians, want to deflect responsibility and attention away from the murder and the systemic racism within the American criminal justice system, American law enforcement, and really, frankly, in American culture, which allows this kind of systemic racism to take root in the police department, so that it becomes actually a thing where a police officer can put his knee on the neck of a black man and suffocate and kill him, while three other officers stand there and do nothing about it, and that things like this have happened hundreds and hundreds of times before, and nobody does anything about it. So that, the blood of black men are crying out from the ground, kind of the way the blood of Abel cried out from the ground against his brother Cain. Now, Christians claim they follow Jesus Christ. They claim to follow the teachings of Jesus that are recorded in the gospel, the teachings of Paul in his epistles, the prophets, and the law of Moses, and all of these traditions of wisdom and conduct and a way of understanding and relating to God and one's fellow man. And so it is quite troubling to me when I see on Facebook the reaction to the very blatant systemic racism in policing and murder by the police of pretty much predominantly black men, and the system's inability to not only stop it, but to bring justice to those who've committed such crimes, is to say, well, like 90%, 95%, 99% of cops are good, so why are we complaining about the one bad apple? Yay, raw cops, go cops. Or they want to take the thousands of peaceful protests that have occurred in the aftermath of this and point out the 1% instances where people that didn't necessarily have the purpose of the protest in mind, but rather wanted to use the event of the protest as an opportunity for them to loot or destroy things. In fact, it's been documented that a lot of these people doing that are white supremacists who want to start a race war. Others are just pure opportunists from various anarchist beliefs and other beliefs, but obviously not the vast majority of protests involve this. I live in New York City, I know this for a fact. Yeah, there were a couple of bad nights in the city, and then I've been walking around freely in various neighborhoods, including Harlem, the Bronx, and Washington Heights, and I don't see all this widespread destruction that everybody wants to point out on the internet. And by everybody, I mean white people, and specifically I'm referring to white Christians who want to deflect responsibility by pointing out all of the irrelevant flaws in other people. For example, I've heard this, like, 10 times now. It's made me angry every time I've heard it. I've also seen it on Facebook. You know, one of the responses to this is, well, don't make George Floyd your hero because, you know, he has this kind of rap sheet, or he had this kind of drug problem. And so now they're smearing the character. But, you know, they did that to Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. too, and pretty much anybody else that has ever wanted to address and deal with these issues. And so now, you know, we've had some momentum to the movement to take down the memorials to Confederate generals and war heroes. And I cringe even to call them war heroes. They were traitors who fought against their own country, leading to the loss of millions, not millions, but hundreds of thousands of lives in the bloodiest conflict in American history, all to preserve white supremacy, and specifically the right to own a slave. And so now white Christians want to post on the internet, don't erase our history. One of the posts I saw was, don't erase history just because the past doesn't conform to today's standards, or something along those lines. But the subtext being, don't take down all our Confederate monuments to what? What are we memorializing here? You don't usually win a war and then erect a statue that kind of creates this mythical or religious imagery and glorifies and creates a hero of the side that's defeated, particularly when the side that's defeated is defending, and is solely defending, the barbaric practice of human slavery based on race. And so, contemplating all of these things, I was reminded of a passage in Scripture from Genesis, the story of Cain and Abel. And obviously hate played a part in that story, not race. They were brothers, but yet we're all brothers and sisters as part of the same human family, and we share basically the same DNA, the same origins and ancestors. And so maybe it does fit, but I'm not drawn to this story at this time because of the act of murder being the first act of hate recorded in the Bible. Although, I mean, you could take that angle and probably come up with a very good sermon about that. But instead, I was drawn to the story because of the response to Cain when he was called out on his deed by God. And so I want to read that piece of it. So we'll start in chapter 4 of Genesis, verse 8. And Cain said to Abel, his brother, "Let us go forth." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and slew him. Now here's the part that I want to focus on. And the Lord said to Cain, "Where is thy brother Abel?" And he answered, "I know not. Am I my brother's keeper?" God didn't ask, "Are you your brother's keeper?" God didn't ask because he assumed that you always knew the whereabouts of your brother Abel. God obviously asked because he knew what Cain had just done. In fact, if you read on, God says, "What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood cries to me from the earth." But Cain wanted to deflect responsibility, and so he said, "Well, I ain't responsible for watching where he's at, what he does, where he goes. What's it to me? Am I my brother's keeper? Why are you asking me where he's at?" And so as a society, as Christians in America, God is asking us today, where is your brother George Floyd? Where is your brother Trayvon Martin? Where is your brother Tamir Rice? Where is your brother Eric Garner? Where is your sister Breonna Taylor? Where is your brother Philando Castile? And I could go on and on. So God is confronting us with these questions. Where is your brother? Where is your sister? And by and large, the response of white Christians particularly has echoed that of Cain, which is, am I my brother's keeper? So God says, where is your brother? And white American Christians say, well, he was a drug dealer, or my brother should obey the police, my brother did this, my brother did that, well, most cops are good, and all of these things that are irrelevant to the question of the moment, because God didn't ask, well, are all cops bad? God didn't ask you if America did some good things in its history. God didn't ask you, well, what the person who's missing did wrong in their life. God is asking, where is your brother? God is asking that because he knows where he is, because as the scripture says, the voice of your brother's blood is crying out to him from the earth. And when we contemplate these things, Cain had an opportunity to just come clean, to admit what he'd done, but instead he deflected responsibility, and that's what American Christians are doing today. And, well, you might say, well, it wasn't my knee on George Floyd's neck. I didn't pull the trigger on anyone. So why would God come to me and ask me where my brother is? Why would God come to me and ask me where my sister is, where my black brothers and sisters are? But let me ask you this. There were 3 other police officers on the scene with the ability and actually the legal authority and responsibility to stop George Floyd's murder. Yes, their knee wasn't on George Floyd's neck, but while their brother officer murdered George Floyd, they turned their heads. They deflected responsibility because they weren't the ones doing it. Let's take this from a different angle now, from the angle of scripture. Now, we know the story of David and Bathsheba. David saw Bathsheba, who was married to Uriah. So she was a married woman. He saw her bathing. He wanted her. He summoned her. He had sex with her. She got pregnant. David wanted to cover up, but none of his plans to cover up this adultery worked. And so plan B was, well, Uriah is, a known soldier, respected general in my army. Why don't I put him on the front lines and let fate take care of him in battle? And it did, and Uriah was killed. Now, when Samuel confronted David, David didn't say, well, I didn't kill him, because David was complicit in his being killed. David put him on the front lines. And when David was confronted by the prophet Samuel, he had to repent of murder and adultery. And so when white Christians are confronted with the systemic racism in our society that dates all the way back to the slavery, and then after the freeing of the slavery to the institution of Jim Crow, and after the abolition of Jim Crow in the 60s and 70s with the civil rights movement and forced integration and busing and all of that, with our own self-segregation, we still worship in segregated churches, and we were complicit in the whole tough on crime policies of the 1990s, which was all about race and about keeping our communities white and using the pretext of crime to persecute black men specifically, as well as the war on drugs. All of this was tied in together in the same thing. And so when God comes to you and says, where is your brother George Floyd? The response isn't, well, I didn't kill him. Because actually, yes, you did, because you participated in that culture, you benefited from it, and you voted for those policies, and then you turned your head the other way when someone else killed him and allowed that person to escape justice. Because if enough people were mad about these things 20, 30, 40, 10, 5, 2 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about it today, because all of the prior murders would have resulted in prosecutions and lengthy jail sentences and departments being defunded and abolished and new ones created. in their stead, ones with a culture that respected life and respected all people and served the public safety and the health of the community. So yes, you are. So to finish with scripture, after Cain responded, I don't know where my brother is. Am I my brother's keeper? The Lord said, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth to me from the earth. Now therefore cursed shalt thou be upon the earth, which hath opened her mouth and received the blood of thy brother at thy hand. If we do not want to be cursed for the blood of our brothers and sisters that is crying out from the land, when God comes to us and asks us where our brother is, the proper, appropriate, and Christian response is not to deflect. It is to move your goddamn knee off your brother or sister's neck and let them breathe. The word of the Lord for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.